The night my son was born, my mother brought me tea. I was 20 years old, exhausted from 14 hours of labor, my body feeling like it had been turned inside out and shaken. Mateo, my boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend by then, had left 3 months into the pregnancy, his mother's voice in his ear, telling him I was too young, too poor, too unstable to be a mother. He sent a check once, then disappeared into the machinery of men who are allowed to walk away. But my mother was there. Carmen, 52 years old, a third-grade teacher with 30 years of service, beloved by her community, respected by her colleagues, the kind of woman who organized bake sales and remembered every student's birthday. She had been disappointed when I got pregnant, ruining your future, she called it, but she had come around. She had been at every prenatal appointment. She had decorated the nursery in her house, where I was staying because I couldn't afford my own apartment. She had promised to help. "Drink this," she said, pressing the warm cup into my hands. "It's chamomile, for the milk, for sleep." I drank it. I was too tired to question her. Too grateful, too young, too desperate to believe that someone loved me enough to show up. I woke up at 3 a.m. The room was dark. The crib beside my bed was empty. I tried to stand, but my legs were jelly, my head spinning. The tea. Something in the tea. I crawled to the hallway, calling for my mother, calling for my baby, my voice cracking like a dry branch. I found the note on the kitchen table. Her handwriting, neat, teacher perfect, the handwriting that had written thousands of report cards. "You are not ready to be a mother. I will raise your son as my own. Do not look for him. Do not tell anyone. If you try, I will tell them you are addicted, unstable, dangerous. I am the respectable one. You are the teenage mother. No one will believe you." I sat on the kitchen floor and I screamed. The sound didn't wake anyone. We were alone in the house, my mother and I, and she had made sure of that. The neighbors were used to silence from Carmen's house. The neighbors trusted Carmen. I called the police at dawn. A young officer came, sympathetic but skeptical. He looked at me, 20, unwed, disheveled. My eyes red from sedatives I hadn't known I took, and he looked at the note, which my mother had not signed. "Your mother took the baby?" he asked. "Yes, she drugged me. She left a note." "And where's your mother now?" "I don't know, she's gone. The baby is gone," he wrote in his pad. "Ma'am, this sounds like a family dispute. Grandparents often step in when young mothers are overwhelmed. Have you considered that she might be trying to help?" "She stole my baby," I said. My voice was hoarse. Desperate, exactly the voice of a woman no one believes. "She drugged me and she stole my baby." "I'll file a report," he said. But his eyes said, "Crazy girl. Teen mother, family drama, you should get some rest. When your mother comes back, you can talk it out." She never came back. By the time I got to a phone to call again, she had resigned from her teaching job, sold her house, and vanished. The police told me they couldn't find her, that she had a right to move. That without evidence of a crime, a note isn't evidence, ma'am. Anyone could have written it, their hands were tied. I was 20 years old. I had no baby. I had no mother. I had a note and a police report that no one took seriously. I had a name for him. Mateo Jr., after his father who didn't want him. After me who couldn't keep him. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're here, maybe you know what it means to have your child taken by someone who is supposed to protect you. Maybe you know the particular hell of being told you're the problem, while the person who stole from you is called respectable. If this is your first time, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories here about mothers who never stop searching, who turn their grief into maps, who find their children in impossible places. Here's my story. Here's my story. I looked for him for 22 years. The first years were chaos. I worked as a nanny, ironic, cruel, necessary, caring for other people's children while mine was somewhere I couldn't reach. I lived in rooms rented by the week, ate food from cans, saved every dollar for private investigators who took my money and found nothing. Carmen had planned her disappearance with the thoroughness of a woman who had spent her life organizing classrooms and anticipating problems. She had changed her name to her dead husband's, Rodriguez instead of Lopez, and moved to a state where no one knew her. She had told people that Mateo Jr. was her Latin life miracle, the product of a brief relationship with a man who had died before they could marry. She had documents. She had a story. She had the respectability I lacked. I went to social services. I went to women's shelters. I went to the FBI, who told me that parental kidnapping by a non-custodial parent was a federal crime, but that grandparent abduction was complicated. I went to lawyers who quoted retainers I couldn't afford. I went to journalists who said my story was sad but not newsworthy. I was a teenage mother who had given up her baby. That was the narrative. That was the box they put me in, and no matter how hard I screamed, I couldn't break the cardboard. I found her once, when Mateo Jr. was 5. A private investigator, the last one I could afford, tracked her to a suburb in Colorado. I drove there, 18 hours straight, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw her in a grocery store parking lot, holding a small boy by the hand. He had my eyes, my chin, the way of tilting his head when he looked at something interesting. I started to run toward them. Then I saw the woman with her, a neighbor, a friend, someone who smiled at Carmen with the trust people give to kindergarten teachers. I heard Carmen say, "Come on, Maddie. Mommy's making your favorite for dinner." Mommy. She called herself Mommy. She looked at my son and saw her possession, her dover, her second chance at motherhood. I froze. I didn't have a court order. I didn't have police backup. I was a stranger in a parking lot, and she was the respectable mother, and if I grabbed him, I would be the kidnapper. I would be the crazy one. I would lose him forever. I went home. I wrote a letter I never sent. I cried until my throat bled, and then I made a decision. If I couldn't find him through the system, I would become the system. I got my GED at 23. I worked days as a nanny, nights as a cashier, weekends studying psychology at a community college. I learned about attachment theory, about trauma in children, about the ways that abusers present themselves as saviors. I learned about the law, family law, criminal law, the patchwork of statutes that sometimes protected children and sometimes failed them. I got a bachelor's degree in child development at 28, a master's in social work at 32. I specialized in parental abduction, in children raised in lies, in the slow unraveling of families built on secrets. I worked for an organization that helped locate missing children, and I used every resource, every contact, every database to search for my son. I found nothing. Carmen was careful. She moved every few years. She homeschooled Mateo Jr. for elementary grades, then enrolled him in small private schools where her reputation as a devoted single mother preceded her. She kept him isolated, busy, grateful. She told him his father was a hero who died, that his mother herself had sacrificed everything for him. She built a fortress of lies so complete that the truth couldn't penetrate. I kept his baby photo in my wallet, the only one I had, taken in the hospital before she took him. I looked at it every morning, every night, every time I wanted to give up. I whispered to it, "I'm still here, I'm still looking. I'm still your mother." When I was 39, I saw her again. Not in person, in a newspaper, of all things. A local Colorado paper, doing a profile on teachers who change lives. There was Carmen, silver-haired, smiling, surrounded by her third-grade class. And there in the corner of the photo was a teenager holding a stack of books. My eyes, my chin, my son. The caption read, Carmen Rodriguez, 62, with her son Maddie, 17, who volunteers in her classroom after school. Her son, Maddie, 17 years old, and he didn't know my name. I read the article 3 times. I learned that she was retiring in 5 years, that there would be a celebration, that her son would be the keynote speaker, honoring the mother who raised him alone. I cut out the photo. I taped it to my mirror and I started to plan. The next 3 years were preparation. I obtained Carmen's records through legal channels, her name changes, her address history, her employment files. I found the gaps, the inconsistencies, the paper trail of a woman who had built a life on erasure. I contacted the private school where Mateo Jr. had graduated, requested transcripts under a FOIA request. I found my own police reports, buried in files, marked unfounded, and I got the DNA. It was easier than I expected. A chance meeting at a coffee shop where Maddie worked part-time, an accidental bump that made him drop his napkin, a quick swap with one I had ready. The test was conclusive, 99.9% probability of maternity. I didn't approach him, not yet. He was still a teenager, still living in her house, still believing her story. I knew from my training that ripping the veil too early could destroy him, that he needed to be an adult with his own supports before he could hear the truth, so I waited. I watched from a distance. I saw him graduate high school, start community college, move into his own apartment at 20. I saw him become a young man, separate from her, beginning to form his own identity. And I saw the retirement party announced. 40 years of teaching, a community celebration. Mateo Jr. would be the speaker, honoring his mother. I bought a dress. Not black, I was not in mourning. Navy blue, professional, the color of authority. I rented a car. I drove to Colorado. And I prepared my presentation. The party was at the school gymnasium, decorated with balloons and streamers and 40 years of class photos. Carmen sat at the head table, wearing a corsage, beaming at the community that had gathered to honor her. Maddie sat beside her, handsome and nervous, holding index cards for his speech. I arrived late, slipping into a back row. I had registered under a false name, Diana Torres, a teacher from another district who admired Carmen's work. No one questioned me. The gym was full of people who had known Carmen for decades, who believed her story, who saw her as the model of maternal sacrifice. The principal spoke first. Then a former student, now a doctor, who credited Carmen with believing in me when no one else did. Then Maddie stood up. He was 22 now. He had his father's height, my eyes, a combination that made my chest ache. He cleared his throat and began to read from his cards. "My mother is the most dedicated person I know," he said. "She raised me alone after my father died before I was born. She worked 2 jobs to put me through school. She never complained, never asked for help, never let me believe that I couldn't achieve anything I set my mind to." He looked at her and his voice softened. "She gave up everything for me. Her career could have been bigger. Her life could have been easier, but she chose me. Every day she chose me. And I am who I am because of that choice." The room applauded. Carmen wiped her eyes, the picture of humble gratitude. I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carried to the front of the gym. "I would like to honor this remarkable mother as well." Heads turned. Maddie paused, confused. Carmen's eyes found me, and for a moment I saw recognition flicker, then denial, then fear. "I'm Diana Torres," I said, walking down the aisle, "but that's not my real name. My real name is Rosa Lopez. And 22 years ago I gave birth to a son in a hospital in Texas. My mother was there. She brought me tea. And when I woke up my baby was gone." I reached the front. I pulled out my tablet. I connected it to the projector. I had bribed the AV technician an hour earlier, a young man who believed in sticking it to the system. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, looking at Carmen, or should I say Mrs. Lopez, "you were a teacher for 40 years. You taught children to read, to write, to tell the truth. So let's tell some truth." I projected the first image, my son's birth certificate. Mother Rosa Lopez. Father Mateo Hernandez. Date October 14, 2003. Time 11:47 p.m. I was 20, I said, unmarried, poor, scared. My mother told me she would help. And she did, she helped herself to my child. Next image, the police report I filed, the one that was marked unfounded. The note she left, photographed by the officer who didn't believe me. Her handwriting, teacher perfect, threatening me with accusations of addiction and instability. Next, her name changed documents. Her address history showing moves every 3 years, always one step ahead of my searches. Her employment records, the gaps that matched my investigations. Then the photos. Me, pregnant at 19, holding my belly with the hope of the very young. Me in the hospital, holding Mateo Jr. for the only hour I was allowed. And then the photo that stopped my breath every time, Carmen in the grocery store parking lot, holding a 5-year-old boy by the hand, calling herself Mommy. Maddie was staring at the screen. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "What is this?" he whispered. "Your history," I said gently. "The one you were never told." I showed the DNA test, the one I had obtained 3 years ago, the one that proved what my body had always known. I showed it to Maddie, to the room, to the community that had worshipped Carmen as a saint. "Maddie," I said, "Mateo Jr., I am your mother. I have been looking for you for 22 years. I never gave you up. I never abandoned you. I was 20 years old, and I drank tea my mother gave me, and I woke up to an empty crib. She has told you a story about sacrifice. The real story is about theft." I turned to Carmen. She was frozen, her corsage trembling, her face the color of old paper. "You told me no one would believe me," I said. "You were right for a long time. But I learned to make people believe. I learned to gather evidence, to build cases, to speak with the authority you tried to deny me. And now," I gestured to the room, to the faces that had gone from celebration to shock. "Now they believe." The principal stood up. This is outrageous. Mrs. Rodriguez, do you have anything to say?" Carmen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For 40 years she had controlled the narrative. She had been the teacher, the mother, the respected elder. And now, in front of her community, her colleagues, her stolen son, she had no lesson prepared. "I did it for him," she finally whispered. She was too young. She couldn't have given him the life I gave him. I was too young, I agreed. But I was his mother. "And you didn't give him a life. You gave him a lie. You gave him a story where he didn't have a father who walked away or a mother who fought for him. You gave him yourself and you called it love. That's not love, that's possession." I turned back to Maddie. He was crying now, silent tears running down his face, his index cards crumpled in his fist. I don't expect you to believe me right now, I said. I don't expect you to call me mom, or to forgive me for not finding you sooner, or to understand any of this today. But I have proof. I have 22 years of proof, and I have the rest of my life to answer any question you ever want to ask. I handed him a folder. Inside, copies of everything, the birth certificate, the police reports, the DNA test, the letters I had written him, one for every birthday, every Christmas, every first day of school he had without me. I wrote these for you, I said. I didn't know if I would ever give them to you, but I wrote them, because even when I didn't know where you were, I was still your mother. And I still am. I stepped back. The room was chaos now, whispers, shouts, the principal trying to restore order, Carmen collapsing into her chair. I didn't stay for the aftermath. I had spent 22 years in aftermaths. I walked out of the gymnasium into the Colorado sunlight and I breathed. I didn't know if he would come. I didn't know if he would believe me or hate me or need years of therapy to process the truth. But I had given him the choice. That was what Carmen had stolen, and that was what I had returned. Maddie called me 3 weeks later. His voice was cautious, cracked, the voice of a young man rebuilding his foundation. I read the letters, he said, all of them, the ones from when I was 5 and 10 and 15. You wrote about things you couldn't have known. My first day of kindergarten, the time I broke my arm, the science fair I won. I found those things, I said. Social media, school newsletters, the detective I hired when I could afford one. I pieced together your life from a distance. It wasn't the same as being there, but it was all I had. She told me you were dead, he said quietly, that you died in childbirth, that she adopted me because she couldn't have children of her own. She had photos of a gravestone. There is no gravestone, I said. There is only me. Alive, looking for you. He was silent for a long time. Then can we meet? Not as mother and son, just as people. I need to know who you are before I know who I am. We met in a park. We walked. We talked about books, movies, his studies in computer science, my work with missing children. We did not talk about Carmen, not yet. That would come later, with therapists, with time, with the slow building of trust. He asked about his father once. I told him the truth that Mateo had left, that he was not a villain or a hero, just a young man who was not ready. Maddie nodded, processing. She told me he was a firefighter who died saving people, that he was a hero. She told a good story, I said, but good stories are not always true ones. We meet now, regularly. Not as mother and son, not yet. As two people learning each other, building something from the wreckage of a lie. He calls me Rosa. I call him Maddie, the name he knows, because forcing Mateo Jr. on him would be another theft. We are careful with each other. We are patient. We are, in our own way, becoming family. Carmen lost everything. Not through the courts. Maddie, at 22, chose not to press charges, not to relive the trauma in a legal system that had already failed us both. But she lost her community, her pension of honor, her carefully constructed identity as the saintly single mother. She moved to a small town, alone, and the last I heard, she was teaching online classes to students who didn't know her history. She is in her mid-60s now, isolated, the son she stole no longer returning her calls. I don't hate her. I don't visit her. I simply don't think about her, except as a case study in the work I do now. I opened La Casa de las Madres Buscadas 2 years ago. It's a small center, 3 rooms above a community clinic, funded by grants and donations. We serve mothers whose children have been stolen by family members, grandparents, ex-partners, aunts and uncles who believe they know better. We help them navigate the legal system, find their children, rebuild their lives. We believe them when no one else does. We say, your story is real. Your child is real. And you are not crazy. I keep my son's baby photo on the wall now, framed with a caption, the search that started everything. Next to it, a newer photo, Maddie and me at the park, smiling cautiously at the camera. The caption, the beginning that came after the end. I am Rosa Lopez. I am 42 years old. I was a teenage mother who was told she was unfit, who was drugged and robbed and dismissed, who spent 22 years becoming the person she needed to be to find her child. And I am here to tell you, if your child is missing, if your family has stolen them, if the world calls you crazy while calling your abductor respectable, do not stop. Do not stop searching, learning, building, becoming. The truth is slow, but it is inevitable. And the mother who never gives up is the most powerful force in any room. See you in the next story.